The fragrance of Rakshasa city, if inhaled too much, can be fatal. The Grand Princess's brothel was unique. It was a male brothel called South Wind Retreat. The male courtesans here were of superior appearance and exceptional charm. The top courtesan resembled the chief minister, which was quite thrilling. It turned out the Grand Princess had done her research beforehand, experiencing it herself before introducing it to the market. People criticized the Grand Princess publicly but eagerly awaited her recommendations. Ding! RoyalStory reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. If the Grand Princess praised a man, he must be extraordinary. The male courtesans had different talents and personalities. You could have them play various roles. Imagine being intimate with the high and mighty chief minister, making him submit. Such was the dream of many young and married women in the capital. Oh, it might not just be women's dreams, it could be men's as well. With such an appeal, who wouldn't want to experience it? People led glamorous lives during the day, but at night, curiosity and dark desires conquered reason. South Wind Retreat had a VIP system. Only those with the Grand Princess's handwritten approval could enter. Thus, her handwritten approvals became a commodity on the black market, with the Grand Princess orchestrating it all, driving the ticket prices sky high. She earned money from the brothel and the middleman's markup. In just 1 month, the Grand Princess made a fortune. People said the Grand Princess was outrageous, but everyone wanted her approval. The chief minister was the last to know. After all, he had a wife and a lover and never visited such places. But someone let it slip that a courtesan resembled the chief minister. The chief minister crushed his cup on the spot and killed the officials who had frequented the brothel. Even the Empress Dowager in the Deep Palace heard about it. She just replaced Heidi's list of imperial merchants, and then Heidi had a new plan to earn money. A centipede dies but never falls down. It was time to pressure Paul Rixon. If he hadn't always claimed she was inconsequential, she wouldn't have grown stronger under his nose. The young emperor ordered an investigation into the recent immoral and illegal activities in the capital, specifically instructing the censor to investigate. The Rixon family was supposed to investigate, but the Grand Princess's faction strongly opposed it. In the end, they chose a neutral censor, the newly appointed top scholar, Simon Kenyon, to handle this messy affair. Thus, Simon was assigned. As a new official, Simon quickly took actions and surrounded South Wind Retreat. Leading a team of soldiers with torches and weapons, Simon stormed in with great authority. Though new, Simon acted methodically. At his command, everyone present knelt and wept in regret, including many nobles. Soldiers interrogated, verified identities, recorded testimonies, and seized illicit money, all proceeding smoothly and orderly. A soldier reported, "The top floor has a locked room, said to be where the Grand Princess is resting." Simon was momentarily stunned, his strict method faltering. The Grand Princess? He called the soldiers back. "No one is to disturb the Grand Princess. I will go myself." At the door, Simon took a deep breath. As he raised his hand to knock, he hesitated, straightened his collar, and smoothed out a tiny wrinkle on his sleeve before gently knocking. No one answered. Feeling puzzled, he gathered his courage and softly called, "Your Highness?" Still no response. White smoke seeped through the door crack, and Simon's face turned pale. He immediately broke down the door and rushed in. Inside was a world of mist, where someone was stirring water, creating a rippling sound. The window faced the door, and when it opened, a cold wind rushed in, causing the layers of white gauze to billow like waves. Simon pushed through the smoke and gauze to find the Grand Princess. She was bathing. Her bare back gleamed, her chest partially hidden by the water's mist, creating an illusion of a full moon in the clouds. The Grand Princess rested her chin on her folded hands, quietly watching Simon, neither smiling nor speaking. He was like a beam of sunlight, dispersing the mist. Simon stood there, speechless, his mind buzzing. If she waited for Simon to speak, the water might turn cold. The Grand Princess finally spoke. "Fool." Simon snapped out of his daze. He turned quickly, closed his eyes, and his heart beat so hard that he went deaf and mad. He could still hear clearly as the Grand Princess stood up from the water, the splashing even reaching his hand. The water was scalding. There was the sound of rustling clothes, and Simon tried not to think about it, but the image of the moonlit water and the eyes in the mist lingered in his mind. He tried to suppress the vivid images, reciting in his heart. To govern the nation, one must first regulate the family. To regulate the family, one must first cultivate oneself. To cultivate oneself, one must first rectify the heart. To rectify the heart. Simon, hand me my outer robe. Her robe hung right in front of him. He couldn't remember the teachings and followed her instructions. The floating fragrance enveloped him without warning. He closed his eyes, not daring to turn, retreating towards the Grand Princess, estimating the distance before handing it over. The Grand Princess laughed softly behind him and took the robe. As she dressed, she spoke, "Simon, are you hot?" Simon shook his head vigorously. The Grand Princess whispered, "But your fingertips are burning." Simon didn't know what to say. The Grand Princess asked, "Why are you here?" The Grand Princess asked knowingly, but Simon had no idea. He answered her seriously, "South Wind Retreat is conducting illegal business. I'm here to investigate. You shouldn't come here. It's not a good place." The Grand Princess finished dressing, slowly walked to him, and saw his eyes were still closed. What a fool! She removed his hand from his eyes. "And what illegal business, Simon, tell me?" Simon was troubled but replied, "It's best you don't know. Just don't come here, all right?" The Grand Princess nearly laughed. He thought she was a pure girl. She had created this pleasure house. How could she not come? But she wanted to tease him, finding this odd fellow intriguing. "If you don't tell me, I'll keep coming. If you tell me, I'll know the bad things and won't come. Is that okay, Simon?" She had learned to say, "Is that okay?" to Simon. Simon frowned, pondering for a long time. This is a place that cheats people out of money. It's full of swindlers. The Grand Princess thought Simon wasn't completely foolish. She softly acknowledged and asked, "And how will you deal with it?" Simon replied, "Seal it, confiscate the property." The Grand Princess dusted off her clothes, said nothing, and slowly walked out. The Grand Princess was angry. He hurriedly ran up to her and grabbed her hand. "What's wrong?" The Grand Princess giggled, "Simon, this shop is mine." Simon frowned tightly, thinking she was joking. But the Grand Princess continued to smile and said, "Simon, do you want to be my friend or my enemy?" Her bright eyes stared at him, leaving Simon speechless. The Grand Princess chuckled softly, seemingly laughing at herself and at him. "I told you, you don't know me. Simon, maybe we can only be enemies." As she spoke, she lowered her eyebrows and eyes, and raised her hand to brush away his fingers holding her sleeve. People in the abyss fear the sunlight. It only exposes all darkness, and the light is the cruelest. Simon didn't know what to do, standing there with his eyebrows lowered, his clean eyes looking at her, and asked, "You need money, right?" He earned his title through his own ability, and he always hit the nail on the head. The Grand Princess smiled faintly and tilted her head to look at him. Maintaining the dignity of a Grand Princess is not an easy task. "Simon, you don't manage a household, so you don't know the cost of daily necessities." She should have left with a flick of her sleeve, so why was she still standing here, chatting nonsense with this fool? Simon was silent for a moment, with his head lowered, thinking about something. After a while, he looked up at her solemnly and said, "I understand." The Grand Princess thought there was a turning point. Could it be that this top scholar was so easy to deceive? She asked with a smile, "You're not going to close the South Wind Retreat anymore?" She was in a good mood and took a step closer to him, looking at him very closely. Simon was still the same Simon, his face vaguely red, not daring to look into her eyes, lowering his eyes to look elsewhere. But as he lowered his eyes, he saw her chest's large brocade lotus flower, bulging in full, like it was blooming in midsummer. His ears also started to burn, but he forced himself to look at other places, whether it was the door or the table, just not at her. "It has to be closed." The Grand Princess was annoyed and said sharply, "In the end, you still want to oppose me." "I don't want to oppose you." Under the Grand Princess's imposing presence, Simon still spoke slowly and gently. The Grand Princess snorted, "Then what do you mean? This business is not good. Don't do it anymore, okay?" This Simon was really unreasonable. How could he think that a simple okay could persuade people? How could he? The Grand Princess was infuriated by him, pacing back and forth with her hands behind her back. After a few steps, she turned around, pointed at him with her finger, her hand trembling slightly, but she couldn't say a word. Simon stood there with his hands down, his eyebrows and eyes obedient, not feeling that he had done anything wrong, just waiting for her to speak. He didn't even know that this should be called a Grand Princess's reprimand. There's a difference between speaking and reprimanding. The Grand Princess was so angry that she laughed, shaking her head. Tell me, what's wrong with this business? There's buying and selling, everyone gets what they need. What's wrong with that? I didn't rob, steal, or kill anyone. What's wrong with it? If you can convince me, I won't do it. If you can't explain it and you dare to close my shop, I'll kill you. Do you believe it? Simon didn't take her fierce threats seriously, still speaking gently and calmly. Your Highness, existence does not mean reasonableness. Perhaps, the demand side honestly reflects their wishes, but the supply side may not be based on fairness and voluntariness. The Grand Princess seemed to hear the biggest joke in the world and laughed heartily, directly interrupting him. Simon, our South Wind Retreat is a place many people are desperate to get into. Here, they can earn a lifetime's money in a month. You say they are not willing? Did I put a knife to their necks to make them come? Simon, you don't understand the hardships of the world. You stand under the bright sky, how could you know that some people, to survive, can sell anything? Talking about willingness, when their lives are at stake, do they still have a choice? It's just a body, a face, a bit of dignity. People in the swamp, to survive, can abandon anything. An old pigeon flew across the clear sky. The sunlight fell on the eaves of the painted building. It was extremely quiet. The Grand Princess paused. Was she crazy? Reasoning with a newly minted scholar. She was wasting her life. He quietly looked at her, as if seeing through her eyes, the hidden sufferings unknown to others. The Grand Princess thought she had convinced him. But no. Simon had his own set of sage books. He pondered, that's why I have to close it. If your South Wind Retreat becomes a shortcut, more and more people will choose the shortcut without making any effort. What does he understand? He's like those high and mighty 4 books and 5 classics, asking people to love themselves, to control themselves and follow the rights. But never telling those living in darkness how to survive. Only after surviving can they talk about how to live and the meaning of living. Simon, what do you understand? You understand nothing. The Grand Princess found it extremely absurd, hearing herself sneer and mock him. Simon, you close one path, can you open a new one? She laughed slowly, walked out slowly, the white pigeon flying across the clear sky brushed past her shoulder and flew away. Who wouldn't want to walk the broad road, if there was one, if they could? Simon closed the South Wind Retreat, and the Grand Princess did not harm him. Perhaps, the medicine he gave her that night kept her heart soft until today. After today, Simon, if you meet me again, don't blame me for being cold-blooded. After all, I have warned you. Simon returned home, his mother holding his sister, sitting in the yard sunbathing and cracking walnuts. Simon asked, Mom, do we have money? Mrs. Kenyon was surprised. When did her son start caring about money? Mrs. Kenyon laughed, not much, but enough for you to get a wife. Lily Kenyon giggled, scratching her face with a little finger and making faces at her brother. Brother is getting a wife. Simon walked over, picked a walnut to eat, lifted his sister onto his shoulder, and said to Mrs. Kenyon, Mom, prepare the money for my marriage, I need it. Mrs. Kenyon was surprised and more delighted. She hurriedly grabbed her son's arm and asked, Simon, do you have a girl you like? How is she? What's her temperament? Where does she live? How old is she? Simon said slowly, she is the most beautiful in the world, her temper may not be very good, her home, well, I haven't been there, and I don't know her age. Lily giggled, brother, you are shy. Simon tickled his little sister. Although there were flaws, Mrs. Kenyon was already beaming with joy. Her son had never been interested in women. She was so worried that she prayed to the gods and secretly had someone diagnose him. Afraid that her son either had a hidden illness or liked men. After the diagnosis, there was no hidden illness. So, could it be? Mrs. Kenyon heard recently about a place called South Wind Retreat. She even thought of buying a ticket and tricking her son into experiencing it to confirm. Now it was great. Her son personally closed the South Wind Retreat, and her son had a girl he liked. A bad temper, no problem. She was the same when she was young, fragile, suspicious, but no problem. As long as the husband loves and pampers her, those thorns will be smoothed out. With her son's personality, if he doesn't like that girl, he will never like her, but if he likes, he will put her on a pedestal. She's not afraid that her son won't be able to win that girl over. So that's settled. When Simon's father comes home at night, she will quickly discuss the betrothal with him. The big Kenyon mansion suddenly became bustling and busy. Mr. and Mrs. Kenyon prepared the property and money for their son's marriage, which was a lot, mostly still in Y City. They were just accompanying Simon to play in the capital. Their family foundation was still in Y City. It would take some time to gather everything. Simon locked himself in the study, working late into the night. Mr. and Mrs. Kenyon came to talk with him by candlelight. They asked, "How are things going with the girl?" Simon was a bit depressed and replied, "Nothing. She still hates me." Mrs. Kenyon, considering herself experienced and well-versed in women's hearts, held her son's arm and advised earnestly, "Simon, don't be foolish. Young girls like to say one thing and mean another. If she says she hates you, it means she likes you. Don't back down." Mr. Kenyon stroked his beard and nodded heavily. Simon was half believing, thinking that the books hadn't taught him this, nor had his teacher. With no evidence, perhaps his mother was right. Simon's dejected mood was slightly lifted. He asked, "Dad, Mom, is the money ready?" Mr. Kenyon patted his shoulder meaningfully, and Mrs. Kenyon covered her mouth and laughed. "Look at you, being impatient. If you rush to propose now, her parents won't agree. Besides, those things can't be gathered quickly." Simon said blankly, "What proposal?" "I just need the money to give to her." Mrs. Kenyon was stunned, and Mr. Kenyon was also confused. What did he mean? So, their son wanted to give away the family fortune for free? So, they were happy for nothing? Their silly son was still the same silly son. Not a penny would be given unless he was getting married. So, Simon locked himself in the study for several days after each shift. Finally, one day, he went to the casino. Gambling was not banned by law, so the Grand Princess's casino continued to operate. The Southern Wind Retreat was sealed off, and the Grand Princess was determined to make the casino flourish. So, the Grand Princess personally went to the casino these days, acting as the dealer and shaking the dice herself. Losing to the Grand Princess was something people were willing to do, and winning against her was something they could boast about for a lifetime. Suddenly, all the rich and poor in the capital flocked to the casino. The Grand Princess, using her old tricks, set up entrance tickets. She also set up a restaurant and private rooms in the casino. When tired of gambling, people could enjoy free gourmet food and take a nap to rest. After resting, they could continue gambling. If you ran out of money, a buddy would pull you aside and say, "Bro, I see you're an honest person. How about I lend you some money to tide you over?" Goodness, even if you ran out of money, there was still money to be had. This was a deal with the devil. Finally, when the buddy calculated that you had lost everything, he would escort you home, taking your house, land, or even wife as collateral. This was a deep abyss you couldn't escape once you stepped in. If you win in gambling, you will become rich overnight, but if you lose, you will lose everything. Everyone thought, I would just try once, win a little money, and leave. But after leaving, there was always a time to come back. Casinos never feared having no returning customers. People are like this, greedy, insatiable. Simon appeared at the Grand Princess's dice table. The Grand Princess put down the dice cup and slowly lifted her eyelids to look at Simon. He didn't belong here, standing there in a clean green robe, completely out of place with the casino's gaudy atmosphere. A smile bloomed at the corner of her lips. "Simon Kenyon, do you want to gamble too?" The Grand Princess wanted to teach Simon a lesson, to show him the dangers of the world and the unpredictability of human nature. In the casino, some people laughed, some cried. It was a mixed crowd, and the smell was very unpleasant. The scent of men's sweat, the fragrance of women's cosmetics. In Simon's eyes, there was only the Grand Princess. She had tied her outer robe into a knot at her waist, one leg propped up on a stool, sleeves rolled up, revealing half of a delicate, fair arm. On it was a spider lily tattoo, its colors spreading wildly, extending to the back of her hand, giving the illusion that if you touched her hand, the flower vines would quickly wrap around you, making you a captive of the poisonous flower. Simon looked into the Grand Princess's eyes and responded loudly, yes. The onlookers, who loved a good show, gathered around. Who didn't know that the new top scholar was a man of integrity and high moral character? It was very interesting to witness the new top scholar falling from grace. The Grand Princess held the dice cup, staring at Simon, and with her slender fingers, she began to shake it. She was also looking forward to seeing Simon cry. This feeling was probably like seeing a happy, excellent child from another family, and one day, you got the chance to pull that child down and make him like you. How great would that be? Misery loves company. Destruction together would be better. Then Simon wouldn't make her feel so miserable every day. If they were both in the abyss, no one would feel embarrassed, right? The crowd was noisy, but Simon was very focused on listening. The Grand Princess performed a trick with her hand, and the dice settled. Her hand pressed on the cup top, her red lips slightly parted. Simon, big or small? It was a simple choice with a 50-50 chance. The gilded words shone on the table. Simon placed all the silver notes he brought on the big word. The Grand Princess asked him again, "Are you sure you don't want to reconsider?" Simon replied firmly, "No need." Why did it seem like the top scholar was so confident? The onlookers were getting restless. It was said that this top scholar was a genius who had achieved the highest honors in 3 consecutive exams. Maybe he had some unknown skills. Immediately, someone shouted, "I'll bet everything on Big 2. Then, one after another, voices echoed, me too, Big." The whole crowd bet on Big. They were betting on the scholar. The Grand Princess stood in the shadows, smiling, and took one last look at Simon. "Simon, everyone's hopes are pinned on you. If you lose, your reputation will be ruined." Simon's forehead was covered with a thin layer of sweat. His fair face was flushed from the heat. He said, "Your Highness, this bet is just between us. Don't involve others." The onlookers were angry, unwilling. Why? If there was money to be made together, why wouldn't he let others benefit? But the Grand Princess waved her hand, "Everyone else, get out. This bet is just between me and Simon Kenyon." She propped her chin and looked at him sideways, smiling. It was a smile that lured people into hell. The whole place fell silent. The Grand Princess opened the cup, and the crowd erupted. Everyone thought the top scholar was a king, but who knew he was a loser? Simon lost everything. The crowd jeered at Simon. The Grand Princess was very pleased and couldn't help but clap her hands and laugh. "Simon, you lost." She wanted to see regret and desolation on his face. But there was none, not a bit. This bookworm. He lost money and didn't even react. More than that, he smiled and said, "Your Highness, I lost, you won." He liked the smile on the Grand Princess's face at this moment, a bold, bright smile. He lost, and she was truly happy. He was happy too. The Grand Princess was annoyed again. Why was he so calm? The Grand Princess signaled to a buddy beside her, who immediately approached Simon and said, "Top scholar, don't be discouraged. Play a few more rounds, and you'll win back everything you lost. I have money here, don't worry, just play to your heart's content. Don't let this trip be in vain." But Simon refused. He wasn't really here to gamble. The Grand Princess's plan failed, and she angrily threw the cup and went upstairs. Simon should also leave. Turning around a pillar, he saw someone selling his wife and daughter, the young wife and daughter crying loudly. Simon turned back and borrowed a little money from the buddy, gambled a few rounds, won just enough, and helped redeem the people, paying the buddy back double. The buddy was dumbfounded. How could this be? He had seen clearly from the side. When others shook the dice, this top scholar was very focused on listening. He could actually hear the dice. So, the top scholar could never lose. Unless he wanted to lose. The buddy clutched the money tightly, afraid Simon would borrow more and bankrupt the casino, which would get him killed by the Grand Princess. The buddy quickly put on a sincere smile and bid Simon farewell. Please don't come again. Never, ever. The Grand Princess walked out of the casino alone. It was dark. A few scattered crows flew overhead. The Grand Princess lowered her eyes, rubbing the flower tattoo on her hand hard. Maybe she could go to Rakshasa City and see Woody in his slumber. Someone called out to her, "Your Highness." Who would call her at night? She thought only ghosts from the underworld or human ghosts would. She followed the voice and turned around. Simon stood at the street corner, smiling brightly at her. Behind him, the lights of thousands of homes lit up one after another. Since Woody fell into a deep sleep, she felt like a wandering ghost at night. For some reason, at this moment, she suddenly felt like she was alive again. The Grand Princess asked wearily, "What are you doing here?" No one knew how Simon grew up with such a resilient and determined heart. Simon smiled shyly. "Just passing by," he said, pointing to the food box in his hand, and softly asked her, "My mother made some sweet cakes. Your Highness, would you like to try some?" It was almost the Qingming festival, and families in the Western Ridge dynasty started making sweet cakes to honor the dead. In fact, people wanted to eat the sweet cakes themselves, but adults couldn't be greedy, so they said, "Let the spirits come back to the world and taste some sweets too." She had eaten them at the Rixon mansion, but in the palace, no one made this kind of folk snack for her. Or rather, no one made it for her. She hesitated. She was hungry. Maybe it was the crows crying too mournfully overhead, or the street lights too bright. The Grand Princess walked to Simon's side, pointed to the food box, and said righteously, "I want a piece." Simon burst into laughter, but thinking it was too presumptuous, he restrained himself halfway, but the smile lines at the corners of his mouth were still deep. They ate the sweet cakes under a wall, with wild spring flowers burning brightly above them, filling the air with warm fragrance. The Grand Princess gobbled down the sweet cakes, and halfway through, she looked up at Simon, who was watching her eat. His eyes were bright, what did they resemble? She remembered, like the moon she saw in the sky on the night she massacred a city. She chewed each bite seriously and spoke to him solemnly, "Your mother's sweet cakes are delicious." Afraid she would choke, he handed her water and frowned, telling her to eat slowly. Tonight, with the bright moon in the sky, they both sat in the light. In the light, he could almost see the fine hairs on her face. The Grand Princess was just a year younger than him. She was only 18 this year. People often forgot that the Grand Princess was just an 18-year-old girl. The Grand Princess asked him, "Does your family live nearby?" Simon smiled faintly, "Not far." Not far, just one in the east of the city, one in the west. How could the Grand Princess not know where Simon lived? He was a person with a jade token, monitored from the moment he stepped into the capital. She said nothing, silently eating the sweet cakes. The sweet cakes filled her stomach, warm, hot, and sweet. She suddenly whispered, "Don't come to the casino again." Simon nodded obediently. The Grand Princess hesitated. She could tell this Simon might have a bit of a liking for her, maybe because he hadn't encountered anyone like her in his world, so he found it novel. But this was just the beginning. When people first met, they were always good. His liking for her was good for her but bad for him. Taking someone's hand makes one feel obligated, eating someone's food makes one feel indebted. Even if she was not very considerate, she felt a little moved. But on second thought, he had sealed her southern wind retreat, causing her to lose so much money. Eating a few pieces of his sweet cakes would make it even. Thinking of this, she felt at ease. She licked the sugar crumbs off her lips and began to ponder how to trick him into giving her the jade pendant. In 2 years, he would surely see through her, and it might be too late to act then. How could she not break her vow to Paul Rixon while still deceiving Simon? She secretly glanced at Simon, who was resting his chin on his hand, watching her quietly in the moonlight. His gaze was very gentle. She smiled and nudged his arm with her elbow. I heard your family is from Y City. They say men from Y City give their brides a family heirloom jade pendant when they marry. Is that true? Simon blushed and said, yes. The Grand Princess leaned her face against his arm, her eyes bright, and asked, can I see it? Simon seemed frozen. Her face gently rubbed against his arm like a little white fox, her eyes mesmerizing. He stood still like a statue, afraid to move and startle her. She tugged at his sleeve again. Can I? He naturally said yes. Even though his parents had told him long ago that the half-jade pendant should not be given to anyone except his future wife. He had long since forgotten his parents' teachings. He took out the half-jade pendant from his waist and handed it to her without hesitation. She took it and examined it under the moonlight. The dragon-shaped pendant, with cloud and thunder patterns, was ancient, and the inner ring had a shallow Kenyan character. So, what was the origin of the Kenyan family? Even if she investigated, she could only find that this half-jade pendant was in Simon's possession. The Kenyan family was too mysterious, and nothing else could be found. If they hadn't come to the capital, no one would have found them. Everyone knew they lived in Y City, but neither she nor Paul Rixon could get anyone to successfully find them despite sending many people. Just when they were at a loss, the Kenyan family suddenly came to the capital. They seemed like an ordinary family of 4. The spies stationed at their doorstep reported daily on what they ate and played, which was utterly boring but made them even more inscrutable. This was the most terrifying, the fear of the unknown. She and Paul didn't dare to act rashly. So, she could only start with Simon, preferably by appealing to his emotions and reasoning. She looked at the pendant for a while and said softly, this thing is quite special. The Grand Princess liked it. Simon smiled generously. Do you like it? I'll give it to you. The Grand Princess looked at him in surprise. Didn't he even need to think about it? Was there really such a foolish person in the world? Of course, she liked it. How could she not? But she didn't want it now. Even if she had it, she wouldn't know how to use it to unlock the secrets of the dragon army. It would just be an ordinary piece of jade. She wanted the jade pendant and its secrets. Step by step. The strategy of playing hard to get, she mustn't arouse his suspicion. The Grand Princess returned the pendant to him with a smile. This is for your future wife. Keep it for her. She was in a good mood today, yawned, and prepared to leave, but Simon suddenly reached out to her temple. She thought he was going to do something, instinctively pulling back. Simon merely picked off the fallen flowers from her black hair and shoulders. They had been standing by the wall for quite a while, not saying much. The moon had gradually shifted. Simon insisted that a young lady shouldn't walk alone at night. Under the stars and moon, he escorted her back to the palace. The chief minister emerged from the palace of the young emperor. It was very late. He stood at the fork of the palace path, hands behind his back, eyes downcast, looking at the eerie shadows on the ground, pausing for a moment. To the right, out of the palace, back to his residence, where his roots lay, where his clan and family lived. The path was brightly lit, smooth, and clear. Everyone told him that was the path he should take. The Rixon family's honor and disgrace weighed on his shoulders. The unseen ancestral laws, the unbreakable blood ties, pushed him to the right. To the left, along a dimly lit path, through the serene and fragrant flower forest, over the winding bridges and corridors, after many twists and turns, was the Grand Princess's palace. Her palace stood in a secluded corner, with a pair of soft hands reaching out in the endless night, beckoning to him. He could almost hear her sweet, tender laughter. He knew it was a road of no return. But that road of no return held the past. No one could forget the past. And no one could resist the past. But as soon as he stepped to the left, he would hear heavy, sorrowful voices stopping him every single time. Paul, would you abandon your family for her? Paul, your mother couldn't close her eyes even on her deathbed. She feared her son would go astray, be scorned, and abandoned by the family. Paul, I know you care for her, can't bear to leave her. But no one can live just for themselves. Your father is old, his hair white, his eyes failing. He nearly took his own life after losing a battle, but he never mentioned it to you. If he doesn't say anything, can you pretend it didn't happen, turn a deaf ear? Paul, your parents had you late in life. They cherished you, couldn't bear for you to suffer. Can you bear to leave them with nothing in their old age, to let the entire family perish for your selfishness? Paul, turn back. One more step forward, and you'll fall into an abyss. The palace night was cold, icy, bone-chilling. He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. He couldn't rush towards her. He chose the family. He took a few steps towards the bright path. Someone called out to him, "Chief Minister, the Grand Princess requests your presence." The words "the Grand Princess" suppressed all his rationality. He turned around and followed the palace servant to the left. He had tried to give up. It was just youthful affection. Gradually, he would forget, slowly, he would get used to it. But it wasn't so. It was like having a rib torn from his body. She was wild and uninhibited, her eyes alluring, shedding her clothes one by one in front of him. She said, "Paul, do you want me?" She said, "Paul, it hurts." She said, "Paul, I'm glad you're my first man, though it's a pity you might not be the last." In despair and destruction, they loved and clung to each other again and again. From day to night, from night to day. No world existed, no princess or chief minister, only Paul Rixon and Heidi Traynor. They knew it clearly. After that, the young Paul Rixon and the young Heidi Traynor were dead. Their youthful throbbing was murdered by their conspiracy. After that, they walked different paths. In the city of Rakshasa, the so-called city of sin, they completely broke apart. It was during the critical time when the former emperor was gravely ill, the edict naming Woody as the heir, but the Rixon empress lured the tiger away and swapped the real for the fake. The Rixon empress colluded with the villains of Rakshasa city to murder the Grand Princess and her brother. At that time, he wasn't yet the chief minister, many things were beyond his control. When he rushed to save her, she was holding Woody, kneeling on the ground, her clothes torn, her hair disheveled, her body bruised and battered, a knife embedded in her inner thigh, blood gushing out. She was nearly gang-raped, and Woody had become a living dead. He was too late. He squatted down and silently embraced her. She had no tears, no light in her eyes, just quietly said, "Paul Rixon, you're here." He wanted to pat her head, comfort her like before, "I'm here, it's okay, Heidi." But she smiled vaguely and said, "Paul, are you satisfied? You're a Rixon family one." Without blinking, she drew a knife and plunged it into his heart with all her might. At 16, Heidi Traynor stopped loving Paul Rixon. Heidi Traynor hated Paul Rixon. She only wanted him dead. He survived. If he had died, no one would have protected her. As for her hatred, it was fine. The power of hatred was immense, enough to support her struggle to live. He couldn't abandon her, their youthful affection was too deeply etched. Family, the Grand Princess, he wanted to protect both. He needed the ability to protect both. From shaky foundations to holding power, every step was difficult, surrounded by wolves and vultures. A single misstep, and even the last bit of flesh would be picked clean. Wanting everything naturally required more effort, always demanded sacrifices, always came at a cost. He couldn't protect her openly, nor could he let her know he was still protecting her. It wasn't the right time yet. The time to protect and love her openly and righteously. He needed to rise one more step. When that day came, when there were no more restraints, perhaps the 16-year-old Heidi Traynor would return? He could only embrace her in the dark, kiss her, indulging in fleeting moments of pleasure. Only at those times, in those illusory moments, did he feel his blood still boiling, still alive, passionately alive. The Grand Princess's palace, like a solitary palace carved out of a desolate mountain, was resplendent and enchanting. In front of the door, a cascade of overgrown flowers blocked out the sky, their fragrance dense and overwhelming. Beneath the flowers was a small table with a dish of pastries, a pot of tea, and 2 cups. She waited for him there, lazily fanning herself with a small dark gold silk fan, swatting at the fireflies that flitted around. The fireflies danced erratically, their light flickering on and off, illuminating her face intermittently. When she saw him approaching, she greeted him with her usual smile and beckoned him over. As he got closer, her cold fragrance enveloped his nose. "Paul, I thought you weren't coming." When had she ever called for him and he didn't come? Never. He always came, though sometimes he was late. She sat beside him, diligently and obediently pouring tea, picking up a piece of pastry and bringing it to his lips. He took a bite, his lips brushing against her fingertips, which were sweet as well. She sat to the side, eating the pastries slowly, one after another, unable to stop. When did you start loving sweets? He knew she hadn't eaten sweets for many years. Why the sudden change? The Grand Princess licked the crumbs off her fingertips, tilted her head thoughtfully, and then suddenly smiled lightly. I just happened to try one, and it seems I got a bit addicted. His heart skipped a beat. Who had given her that first piece? He pulled her over, holding her on his lap, and brushed her lips with his thumb, his voice deep. Don't eat things given by others so casually. She wrapped her arms around his neck and laughed softly. Paul, you seem jealous. His expression darkened, and he lowered his head to kiss the sugar on her lips. She quickly pushed him away, still smiling. What's the rush? Wait until I've taken my medicine. A palace maid brought over a bowl of pitch-black medicine, it smelled pungent and unpleasant. He frowned and asked, What's wrong? Why are you taking medicine? She smiled gracefully. You don't know? She picked up the bowl and drank it all in one go, then slowly smiled. Oh, right. Your esteemed wife doesn't need to drink this. It's contraceptive medicine. His heart sank. Contraceptive? She picked up another sweet and ate it, speaking carelessly between bites. Well, I guess I'm the most considerate lover in the world. I'm afraid if there's an illegitimate child, you would have to go to the trouble of getting rid of him. Shouldn't you reward me for being so thoughtful? His throat felt as if it were stuffed with cotton, rendering him speechless. If they had a child. She thought he would kill their child. She glanced at him. His face was somber, lost in thought. Did she say something wrong? She had invited him tonight to make him happy. She had already planned how to deceive both him and Simon. She quickly moved closer, holding his arm, and said softly, Paul, what's wrong? Are you angry again? He gently pushed her hand away, his voice hoarse. It's nothing to do with you. Her specialty was using a dull knife, catching him off guard, cutting his heart slowly and painfully. A dull knife hurt the most, it was a slow, lingering pain. What exactly was he upset about? She couldn't fathom. Perhaps mentioning his wife made him feel guilty? He seemed to particularly dislike her bringing up his wife in front of him. That's just how the chief minister was, doing things but afraid of others mentioning them. She lowered her face and let out a silent, cold laugh. Quickly, she raised her face again, putting on her usual gentle smile. She stood up slowly, picked up her small silk fan, and let the gold tassel dangle from her fingertip, leaving a red mark. Paul, it's my fault for bringing up your wife and ruining the mood. I'll be more careful next time. I'm tired and will rest now. Please make yourself at home. She turned and walked into the hall, the smile on her face slowly freezing into ice. In the end, the chief minister spent the night in the Grand Princess's palace. She fell into a deep sleep, and only then did he dare to kiss her lips in the dark. They were sweet lips. Heidi, if we had a child, with your blood and mine, I would give him everything I have earned. The contraceptive packets in Grand Princess's palace had all been replaced by the chief minister. No one is innocent, and no one is beyond pity.